But at the end of the day, the Israelis on the ground, they have to do the job. And we have seen them failing in front of the Palestinian resistance that live in a big open air concentration camp in the 364 square kilometers, failing in Lebanon after 4 weeks trying to break into the border with 5 divisions, 80,000 men, and not being able of breaking through the first line of defense, and being bombed on daily basis by Hezbollah. Haifa had become a routine to be bombed every day. Tel Aviv is bombed with 2 to 4 missiles per day. So we don't really see Israel anymore as the strongest army in the Middle East, in particular when the US and the UK offer more than 4,800 reconnaissance, intelligence, weapon supply to the Israelis in less than 1 year. So Israel is not fighting on its own. It's fighting with the Americans, with the British, with the support of the German ammunition, and yet failing to achieve its objectives.
It is my absolute pleasure today to have this conversation with Elijah Magnier. Elijah is a seasoned geopolitical analyst and a war correspondent with over 35 years' experience of covering conflicts all over the Middle East. In my opinion, there's no one better placed to help us understand the current situation in the region. Before we get started, I wanted to take this opportunity to thank you for supporting Kianistan. Please do not forget to subscribe, as this really helps. We're trying to get over the 1,000 subscription mark to help monetize the channel. Inspired by the events in the Middle East, we have decided to make this channel a not-for-profit venture. So your support is really appreciated to help us get this channel monetized so we can improve the quality of our production and also maybe able to help people affected by the conflict in the Middle East more directly. Thank you, and now let's get started. Elijah, thank you so much for joining us today. It's an honor and a privilege to have you with us.
It's my pleasure.
Elijah, I really appreciate your time. Are you speaking from Belgium right now?
Yes, I am in Brussels.
Brilliant. Okay, so I've got a bunch of questions I wanted to get your thoughts on. And I wanted to start with like a general question. And the question is, with your extensive knowledge of Middle East history, geopolitics, how do you interpret the current events? Do you think this is another period of turmoil that's going to pass and then we're going to go back to status quo? Or do you think this is a major turning point and we will never go back to how things were previous to October 2023?
I think following the 7th of October, I don't think the situation in the Middle East will turn as it was, even if the Israelis will try their utmost best to make sure that the Palestinians will suffer in the reconstruction of Gaza. But we need to see if the Israelis are going to stay or they're going to leave Gaza, because in a way they are attacking the north after dividing the north from the south. Now they're dividing the north in 2 parts, and it is not clear if the Israelis want to stay in the area of Jabalia camp, Jabalia city, Beit Hanun, Beit Lahia, Ashate, and isolate it and destroy it completely, because we heard the Israeli ministers like the security minister Itamar Ben-Gvir speaking about the reconstruction of Israeli settlers in Gaza.
Yeah. And do you think that is a long-term strategy, given the previous attempts on trying to manage things from inside? Do you think that is a long-term strategy that's workable?
I don't think there is really a feasible strategy for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, because he's trying while he's going along the line with the event in Gaza. We've seen him first hesitating to go into the Gaza Strip, and then trying to go in the north in specific areas, and then trying again in the south, and then ultimately went to Rafah, and now he's everywhere. And he has destroyed most of Gaza, but he did not manage to defeat the resistance. Therefore, even Benjamin Netanyahu, who has consideration to his government partners like Ben-Gvir and the finance minister, Bezalel Smotrich, he needs to see what he can achieve. And now with the war that he is engaged with in Lebanon and the possibility to hit Iran and Iran to hit back, things are still unclear. There is no really long-term strategy because so far Benjamin Netanyahu has failed into his objectives to defeat the resistance in Gaza, to free all the captives, and to create a buffer zone in Lebanon. So none of these objectives have been met, and the war is still ongoing. So I think it's too early to assess.
I think you're right. I find it very confusing when I look at all the events. I find it confusing. I'm not sure whether Netanyahu, how strong his intelligence is, meaning that does he actually understand what his enemies are thinking and how they operate and what drives them forward and what will defeat them if that's what he's looking for? Because one of the things that I was really surprised about was after the martyrdom of Yahya Sinwar, I was really surprised that the Israelis went and released the video that actually made Sinwar a bigger hero in the eyes of the Palestinians, but the whole world. Why would they do that? Was that like a misunderstanding of how their enemies think?
It's a misassessment. And I think in this war, there were many miscalculating steps by everybody, including the Israelis. So for the Israelis to go and bomb the consulate in Damascus, that was a miscalculation. For the Israeli to go and assassinate Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran, that again was a miscalculation. So I think on both sides, on all sides, there were miscalculation, and certainly the tactical miscalculation of showing the drone footage and how they have killed Yahya Sinwar and turned him into a real hero that he will always be remembered, and try to fake and stage a kind of operation by a kind of comedy to show that they fought against him, didn't work. So no, the Israelis are unaccountable. They do mistakes and they don't care at the end of the day. They do whatever they want.
Yeah, because I think the only strategy seems to be right now to just kill as many people as they can, to turn the public against them somehow, or to just evacuate the whole area. And neither one of those seem to be working. But other than that, on the battlefields, they're not having success anywhere at the moment. Is that your understanding?
Well, I think they don't want to kill everybody because they can't kill 2.5 million people. What they're doing is they are forcing the displacement of the people from the north, from part of the north, into the Gaza city that is in between Jabalia and the Netzarim corridor. And they are managing to do so because there is around 100,000 Palestinians there in various Palestinian camps, because Gaza is made of different Palestinian camps from people who fled from all over Palestine when the Israelis occupied a large part of the Palestinian territory. And what they're doing is emptying bits by bits, and they're starting now with the part of the north, and they're succeeding in destroying every single house and building. They haven't finished that part of the job yet. It's going to take a long time. They need a lot of explosive. They need more than the 50,000 tons of explosive that was provided by the Americans and the Germans and the British. But they're trying to destroy as much as possible to push the Palestinian away and make sure they have a kind of a buffer zone. Now, if the war continues at this scale and the Israelis find a way to stop the war in Lebanon and avoid a larger war with Iran, then may concentrate further on the Palestinian and avoid stopping the war. But all will depend on after the 5th of November and the result of the US elections and what the new president is ready to offer to Israel.
That's a very good point. And I really want to get into the effects of the US presidential elections. But before we go there, it's interesting to hear your comments that you think it was a poor calculation, a mistake on behalf of Israel, the attacks on the Syrian consulate and also the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh, where I felt that, if anything, those are the things that are very calculated and with a specific purpose to drag US into the war and drag Iran into the war. So I was thinking maybe that is not a miscalculation. That is a very kind of calculated move to drag into the war, no?
I don't think so, because the Americans and the Europeans expressed their full support to Israel. Therefore, Benjamin Netanyahu thought that he was in a position of power to go and challenge the Iranians in Damascus, because he has been killing many Iranian advisors, and Iran did not really retaliate in the same way that Iran did in the first time in April by sending ballistic missiles, drones, and cruise missiles. So, and a retaliation from Iran would have been limited to cyber attack or to an attack against a Mossad base in Erbil, as Iran did. And all these are reaction that Benjamin Netanyahu can absorb and can accept. He never thought that Iran is going to actually bomb Israel with this amount of missiles. And then again, by assassinating Ismail Haniyeh, for the first time in the history of humankind, a state like Iran bombed with 200 ballistic missiles, launching them with a limit between 7 to 10 minutes in a kind of 3 corridors only. That is impossible for anyone to intercept all of these missiles, and showing how Iran can actually bomb Israel further than this. And this is what now it's on the table if Israel wants to hit Iran again. So I don't think Benjamin Netanyahu wanted this, because after the second Iranian hit, Benjamin Netanyahu, it doesn't feel as strong in front of Iran as he was when he assassinated Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran.
That's interesting. Also, I feel that after the first attack by Iran on Israel in April, the West and Israel kind of fell into the trap of their own propaganda, saying how the attack was pathetic and it was ineffective, whereas it was the attack from Iran was supposed to be a signal, a message of their capabilities. And I think they kind of misinterpreted that, and then led into the further escalation that then resulted in Iran showing more strength. And now, what do you think? There's a big delay in a response from Israel, and everyone's expecting something to come from Israel now, a retaliation of the retaliation. Do you think that's forthcoming, or do you think that there's a serious pause now?
Well, Israel is in days of feast now that will end tomorrow. And there are additional couple of days also until Monday that can be considered also as important for the Israelis, as they are considered joyful days. However, the real Jewish holiday ends tomorrow night. So from tomorrow onward, the Israelis can hit Iran, and this is what they are planning. But allow me to elaborate on the first hit in April. In April, Iran used liquid fuel missiles that need several hours to be prepared, where everybody can see when the hit is coming. And Iran used cruise missiles that are slower than the ballistic missile, and drone that they need time to reach the objective, and everybody was in the air. the British, the Americans, the French, the German, the Jordanian, everybody was in the air waiting for these to intercept them. But Iran launched only 7 ballistic missiles with solid fuel and hypersonic missile against 1 military base during that attack. And the message was, if we want to hit you hard, we can. So let us call it even here and stop attacking Iran. But Benjamin Netanyahu didn't assess the fact that Iran can retaliate again with this kind of size. And this is where he miscalculated, and this is where Iran showed its ballistic missile power. And something that really put off Benjamin Netanyahu and decreased his popularity in relation to Iran. He still enjoys a lot of popularity because he's going toward Lebanon, and attacking Lebanon has killed the Secretary General, Said Hassan Nasrallah, and then destroyed many of the overground warehouses that belonged to Hezbollah, and assassinated many leaders and did the sabotage attack. But now he's starting to lose the momentum. If he goes to attack Iran and Iran retaliate, then he will lose even further.
And how do you see, first of all, the leak coming out of apparently out of US for the planned attacks from Israel? Do you see that as actually coming out of US? Some people say it might even have come out of Israel. But I'm also thinking, how realistic is the leak? Is it at all possible that a leak came jointly from US and Israel with the purpose of throwing Iran off guard and then coming in with a surprise attack? Is that a possibility?
No, because everybody's waiting for this attack. And it is known that Israel is going through a period of feast, and that during the feast, Benjamin Netanyahu doesn't want to spoil the feast on the Israeli because of the Jewish calendar. So this is why the attack is expected. And the leak that came from the US is really insignificant, because the Americans really didn't say anything about it, apart from the attack is going to happen. On the contrary, we had Secretary of State Antony Blinken saying, if Iran retaliates to the Israeli strike, then Iran will regret it. It means it's confirming the attack that everybody knows that is going to happen. So it's just a kind of noise with no benefit and purpose, and is not adding anything to what we know or we don't know.
That's true. I heard similar points of views expressed from people within Iran, saying that we've learned nothing new from these leaks that we didn't already know. One of the things that was interesting for me from these leaks is that Israel was planning to attack Iranian radar systems, Iranian missiles, and things like that, things that suggest that this was not going to be an isolated attack, but maybe the first attack in a series, so clearing way for future attacks.
Iran is 1,640,000 square kilometers. Is Israel going to destroy all of Iran's capability over that geography? The answer is impossible, even with the full support of the Americans. The problem the Americans and the Israelis are facing are two. First, any hit will be considered as a setback to Iran, but not a destruction of all its capability. If we're talking about nuclear capability or missile capability. Secondly, what's going to happen if Iran managed to down one of these planes? How the rescue mission is going to be conducted in an Iranian territory where everybody is on full alarm and very alerted to something similar that can happen. And what about the Iranian retaliation? A quick assessment of what the damage were, and then Iran will retaliate immediately even before the arrival or return of the jets, because we've seen with the Iranian attack, the last one, the missile took between 7 to 10 minutes. We're talking about the jets forced to cross 1,000 miles, 1,600 kilometers from Israel to the closest area in Iran that is close to Kurdistan in Iraq. And that's the closest. What about refueling in the air that take between 5 to 10 minutes for each jet? So all that is a long delay where the missile can arrive if Iran wants to retaliate immediately. And if not, Iran will retaliate later on. But Iran has no choice but to retaliate. Now, retaliating against Israel, Israel is not more than 22,000 square kilometers. We're talking about a very small geography in comparison to what Iran has and the damage that Iran can cause on Israel if it wants to launch a much larger attack. So nothing has been really defined yet on the Israeli side that they're going to go and attack and be victorious. We still need to see what they are going to attack. Can they destroy all Iran missile stockpile, even the one under the ground? They need more than 100 jets for that. They need more than 200 to 400 bunker booster bombs, because each plane for this distance can carry a maximum of 2 or 3, unless the B-52 from the United States will come into play. So that it's so complicated. It is not an easy attack from the military logistic point of view. So this is where we are at today.
Very true. I think they also need to take into account refueling on the way to Iran, on the way back from Iran, which further complicates things. Let me just take a moment's break to introduce our sponsors for today. This episode is proudly being sponsored by the Worldwide Listings Company Limited, or WLC for short. WLC is a e-commerce marketing agency specializing in making brands successful on Amazon. So if you are thinking of starting a new venture, or if you already have a brand and you want to take it to that next level, then get in touch and WLC will be able to help. For transparency purposes, let me also tell you that WLC is actually a company that I founded and am the director of. When you get in touch with WLC, you'll be getting in touch with me and my team, and we look forward to greeting you and seeing how we can help. Thank you, and now let's get back to the episode. Can you, Elijah, also shed some light on the significance of the upcoming US elections and how that impacts Israel's policies and thoughts and strategy, what they can achieve before the elections, and how they might be either limited or have a freer hand straight after the elections?
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is not giving any gift to this current administration because Joe Biden is leaving anyway. And his favorite candidate is Donald Trump, because Donald Trump said very recently that Israel, and he made the gesture with his hand, he said Israel is too small, it needs to be larger. And larger means what? Jordan, Egypt, Lebanon. Smotrich said the limit of Israel is to Damascus. They want a piece of Saudi Arabia. So this is the greater Israeli dream, that Donald Trump may be more ready to help the Israelis to achieve that, rather than the Democrat who wants a two-state solution, but they're doing nothing about two-state solution. So I don't know which one is worse for the Palestinian people, but at the end of the day, there is one that can give the Israelis more support than the other in their long-term project. But at the end of the day, the Israelis on the ground, they have to do the job. And we have seen them failing in front of the Palestinian resistance that live in a big open-air concentration camp in the 364 square kilometers, failing in Lebanon after 4 weeks trying to break into the border with 5 divisions, 80,000 men, and not being able of breaking through the first line of defense and being bombed on daily basis by Hezbollah. Haifa had become a routine to be bombed every day. Tel Aviv is bombed with 2 to 4 missiles per day. So we don't really see Israel anymore as the strongest army in the Middle East, in particular when the US and the UK offer more than 4,800 reconnaissance, intelligence, weapon supply to the Israelis in less than 1 year. So Israel is not fighting on its own. It's fighting with the Americans, with the British, with the support of the German ammunition, and yet failing to achieve its objectives.
Very true. And yes, Israel wouldn't have a hope without all of that support. Israel wouldn't be in existence without all of that support. Also, I'm thinking, going back to the American elections, so the way I look at it, and I'd like to know your thoughts on that, the way I look at it is, if the Democrats win, I think we can easily predict how that will impact. I think it's just going to be a continuation of the current policy. If the Republicans win, if Trump wins, on one hand, yes, he has a history of supporting Israel, making things difficult for Iran. But he also has a history. I was looking at, so he's, since Jimmy Carter, who left office in 1981, Trump is the only president in more than 40 years who hasn't started a war, a new war, while he was in office. Not only that, he also was the president who tried to wind down the wars in Afghanistan and in Iraq. So there's that side of Trump as well. Which side do you think is going to prevail in this scenario?
Donald Trump tried to provoke a war with Iran when he killed the Brigadier General Qasem Soleimani and Abu Mahdi Mohandes in Baghdad in January 2020. And when he lost the election to Joe Biden, he revealed that he asked Benjamin Netanyahu to go to war against Iran, and he said Netanyahu is too coward because he did not want to go, and I encourage him and I will support him. I don't think the Americans are lacking warmongers among the Republican or the Democrats, and I think Donald Trump is the one less of a political background for him to understand the consequences of starting a war. He looks at it from the commercial aspect, and he looks how this is going to affect the American finance. However, he knows how to squeeze Middle Eastern countries, oil-rich countries, to take up their money and finance any war that he wants. So I don't think in this, if Donald Trump wins, he's going to stop the Israelis. On the contrary, he will force the Middle Eastern country to finance Israel war, because the Americans are financing this war and becoming very heavy on them. They paid $3.5 billion on the part of the Obama plan of 10 years. They paid $27 billion. They paid $8.7 billion, and they opened all their strategic warehouses in the Negev desert, and they're supplying unlimited interception missile to the Israelis. This Israeli war is costing a lot of money for America. But of course, they're printing money, they don't care, and they think they are boosting their arm industry. But at the end of the day, this is not the way that Donald Trump thinks. Now, is that going to stop him from unconditionally support Israel? I don't think so.
That leads me up to my next question, Elijah, which is, I was wondering, regardless of who wins the elections in America, can America sustain the war in Ukraine and the war in the Middle East? I was looking, I think, on top of the numbers that you've mentioned in the Middle East, I think America has spent in the last 2 years about $178 billion in equipment and aid to Ukraine, which is even more than the whole defense budget of Russia that they've thrown into Ukraine. Can they seriously sustain these two wars? And if not, how is it possible to end? If anything, I can see maybe if Trump comes, he might want to end the war in Ukraine, but ending that war is not going to be easy because at the moment Russia has the upper hand. So unless you kind of bow down to Russian demands, how do you end that as well?
I don't think it's a choice for the US to end both wars. First, the NATO war on Russia, because the Americans told us that there are 50 nations in Ramstein, Germany, planning, conducting, supporting the war against Russia and supporting Ukraine. For the Americans, this war is vital to keep Europe under the US umbrella, which is, to better say, under the US control. And Europe now is dominated by the US policy, and Europe has accepted to be dominated and to fulfill the US interest rather than European interest. We have a huge gap between the interest of the people and the behavior and the decisions of the European leaders. And to keep NATO alive, the Americans need this war. Remember 2018 when the French President Emmanuel Macron said that NATO is a brain dead, and he said that Europe needs an army to defend itself against all enemy, including the United States. So we move from that to a total dominance of NATO in Europe and the omnipresence of the US conducting war on European soil against the Russians. So whatever this is going to cost, the Americans will continue with it. In relation to Palestine, again, it is strategic for the US because looking at Israel as a defeated entity, it means there is no point for other countries in the Middle East to normalize with Israel, as Israel proved to be weak, and there is no benefit from having this kind of relationship. If Israel stopped the war with Lebanon tomorrow, it is defeated. It has lost the war. So why establishing relationship with such an entity that is not capable of sustaining a war against non-state actors that are very weak in comparison to what Israel's support is getting, and the support from the superpower, the United States, and from the UK, from France, from Germany, from everybody who is considered a strong military power and industrial military power. They're supporting Israel, and Israel has 180,000 professional soldiers and 350,000 reservists incapable of defeating the Palestinian resistance in such a small area, but only managing to violate international laws, committing war crimes and crimes against humanity. That is not power. That is a weakness per se. So for the Americans to see this situation unfolding in the Middle East, it is not something that falls into the strategic interest of the US. Therefore, the difference between the Americans and the Israelis is what is the best for Israel. This is what the Americans are trying to do, and this is why the Republicans don't think in the same way as a Democrat, because the Democrats are thinking what Israel is doing is not serving its purpose and it is not in its interest. The Democrats are trying to defend the interest of Israel more than the Israelis, because they understand Benjamin Netanyahu is conducting a personal war to remain in power.
Thank you for that. That's really interesting analysis. I've been really disappointed with the stance by Germany in the Middle East. given their history of a genocide, how they are willing to support another genocide. But on the other hand, I'm thinking, how can we expect Germany to think independently in the Middle East when they can't even think independently in what's going on in Ukraine? They basically sabotage their whole own economy in the interest of American strategy and plans, which is completely bizarre how they've destroyed their own industry and for the unforeseeable future. What do you think about the economic effect of all of this on the German economy?
President Charles de Gaulle said a long time ago, any country that has forces that can come and leave anytime they want with a military base that is foreign to the country is an occupied country. Germany has many US military bases where the Americans can do whatever they want and they can deploy nuclear bombs directed towards Russia. And the Americans have the decision of when to fire it. Germany is an occupied state by the Americans. Secondly, the biggest natural disaster occurred and affected directly Germany with the Nord Stream 2, and yet Germany is not investigating it. Yeah, so Germany has been and again is on the wrong side of history. When Germany consider by its foreign minister that is an amateur, a foreign minister who asked President Putin to change his policy 360 degrees and doesn't understand what 360 degree means, it means that this is a real amateur. Secondly, Germany that justified the killing of children, inventing a law saying that Israel has a right to kill children if Hamas is hiding behind the children. That is unheard of. The international law doesn't allow this to happen. The international law doesn't give the right to hit civilians, even if there are militants there. So all that shows the amateurish side of Germany. Therefore, it is not surprising what we see and how we see Germany behaving. But it's not only Germany that is affected by the European decisions. When Europe decided to give 50 billion euros, i.e. $54 billion to Ukraine, when in Europe we are suffering inflation, devaluation of the currency, all the figures that given by the government are wrong. We see the power of the euro is really diminishing very harshly. We see people saying at the beginning, well, Russia is part of the continent and we don't want to war with Russia. And suddenly all that changed after a couple of months. We see that the Americans offering to all European industry benefit to come without taxes for 5 years with the cheap energy when we go and buy either the Russian energy from India 3 times more expensive, or we buy it from Norway and the United States 4 times more expensive. This is really an idiotic policy. We are everything that falls against European population interest. So the economy, not only in Germany, but in all of Europe, is going in tatter because of the European leaders' decision.
That's absolutely true. And it's surprising the leadership that Europe is showing, or the lack of. Elijah, you've made a really good case of why it is in the US interest to keep the Ukraine war going and to keep the Middle East war going. However, at the same time, is it not true that the actual peer competitor to the US and the ones that they ultimately should have their eyes on is China? And China is benefiting from American preoccupation in all of these ongoing conflicts. And at the same time, in America, there's people who are threatening China economically and also in relation to Taiwan. So how do you see China's role in all of this, and China getting maybe sucked into America's adventurism?
I don't think China is really worried about what the Americans are doing because, first, China doesn't want to stand against America. There are business interests on both sides. Secondly, China is defending itself because it's learning from the Ukrainian war, from the Israeli war on the Palestinians. So it is learning how NATO is behaving, what are the weapons that work and what are the weapons that don't work, what are more efficient than others, what China needs to develop. This is what was a learning ground for Russia and for the non-state actors as well as for Iran. So everybody is learning from these wars. But we've seen China creating artificial island to challenge the Philippines and challenge the Americans in the Philippines, challenging Taiwan, uh, starting with its own semiconductors industry because it doesn't want to be blackmailed by Taiwan or the Americans, having its own technological development, but also on the same time developing a very strong and modern army in case of if things go wrong for one reason or another. But I don't see anything going wrong. On the contrary, China is happy to see the Americans spending so much money and ammunition in Ukraine and in Israel, which means less ammunition for the Americans to use in case of a war with China. Is also happy to see all the Europeans using all their ammunitions and not having any to defend themselves in case of war. They can't go to war anywhere. I'm sorry, I'm having a call for my interview, but I'll finish here. So for China, yes, it is in its favor to see what's happening today and how everybody is caught in a war that divert the attention away. But I don't think a war in China is any near or any possible. Watching how NATO is struggling against Russia.
Elijah, I'm extremely grateful for your time. I have tons of other questions. Maybe let's arrange another day. I've already kept you 10, 15 minutes longer than we agreed, and I'm grateful for your time. Is there any closing remarks that you'd like to give before I say goodbye?
No, I think all your questions were very intelligent and timely, and I enjoy this session really. Thank you.
Thank you, Elijah. I've been listening to you for years, and it's a pleasure to speak directly to you today. All the best, and speak to you again soon.
All the best to you too.